When a corrupt anti-conservative judge humiliates Vice President Nathaniel Cross in court, he believes he's untouchable. But when his target fights back, karma strikes swiftly, leaving the entire courtroom in stunned silence. Before we dive into this gripping story, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. The day justice took a stand. The day began like any other at the federal courthouse in Washington, D.C., though there was an undercurrent of tension in the air. Judge Gerald Whitmore, infamous for his unpredictable temperament, arrived in a particularly foul mood. "I said no coffee in my courtroom." Whitmore snapped, his voice slicing through the quiet as he barked at his trembling clerk, Emily Sanders. The young woman flinched, her hands shaking as she gathered the judge's files. "And tell the defense team," he continued, his tone seething, "if they're not in this courtroom within 2 minutes, I'm issuing contempt charges." The packed gallery watched in silence as Judge Whitmore ascended to his bench, his face already flushed with irritation. His reputation for harsh rulings and biting sarcasm was well known throughout the district, but in recent months his behavior had taken on an even more erratic, vindictive edge, especially in cases involving conservative politicians or donors. "Your Honor," Emily whispered cautiously, stepping toward him with a file clutched in both hands. "Vice President Cross has arrived to give his testimony." Whitmore's scowl deepened into something more sinister. "Isn't that special?" he sneered, not even attempting to conceal the disdain in his voice. "Make sure he understands this isn't the Senate floor. His title means absolutely nothing in my courtroom." The murmur in the gallery grew as Nathaniel Cross entered. There was a quiet dignity in the way he walked, his stride confident yet respectful. The vice president nodded politely to the court staff as he made his way to the witness stand. Whitmore's gaze followed him, cold and unwavering, his fingers drumming against the bench in an impatient rhythm. "Let's get something straight," Whitmore announced, his voice heavy with contempt. "I don't care what position you hold in Washington. In this courtroom, I am the law. Is that clear, Mr. Cross?" "Crystal clear, Your Honor," Cross replied evenly, his tone calm but resolute. "I am here simply as a witness to the truth." "Truth?" Whitmore scoffed, leaning back with a smirk. "We'll see about that." The defense table was already tense when Whitmore turned his glare toward them. "Let's get this circus started." The defense attorney, David Lansing, stood and began his opening statement. "Your Honor, we intend to demonstrate that Mr. Bennett's charitable contributions." Whitmore cut him off with a mocking laugh. "The context," he barked, "is that your client is accused of tax evasion. Period. I don't need a sermon about his so-called charity work." "Your Honor," Lansing continued, trying to maintain composure, "these contributions speak directly to his integrity." "Irrelevant," Whitmore snapped, his gavel slamming down with an echoing crack. "Move on. I won't warn you again." Throughout Lansing's statements, Whitmore's interruptions grew more aggressive. Each time the attorney attempted to present evidence of Bennett's community work, Whitmore waved it away with a snarl. When it was finally time for Vice President Cross to testify, Whitmore's hostility escalated. "Stand up straight when you take the oath," he snapped, despite Cross's impeccable posture. "And speak clearly. I won't have any political doublespeak in my courtroom." Cross nodded respectfully. "Of course, Your Honor. I can attest to Mr. Bennett's financial transparency," Cross began, particularly regarding his work with the Faith and Families Foundation. "Oh, here we go," Whitmore interrupted, rolling his eyes theatrically. "Another conservative fairy tale about family values." Murmurs rippled through the gallery. Even the prosecution shifted uncomfortably in their seats as Whitmore's blatant bias became impossible to ignore. "Let me be clear," Whitmore continued, leaning forward with a venomous glare. "I've seen enough wealthy conservatives trying to hide their fortunes behind charitable fronts. Your presence here doesn't impress me, Mr. Vice President. In fact, it makes me question Bennett's character even more." Cross remained composed, but his steady gaze seemed to provoke Whitmore further. The judge's hands trembled slightly as he shuffled his papers, his eyes darting to a particular folder on his bench. "I have here," Cross said smoothly, "documented evidence of Mr. Bennett's charitable contributions, including the records from the March Foundation meetings. Those records are inadmissible." Whitmore thundered, though no objection had been raised. "On what grounds, Your Honor?" Lansing asked carefully. "Don't you dare question my rulings," Whitmore spat, his face now a furious shade of red. "One more word, and you'll be joining your client in contempt." The prosecutor glanced uneasily at his co-counsel. This was no longer judicial discretion. This was something else. Something personal. "Your Honor," Cross said quietly, "these documents were submitted properly during discovery." "Oh, were they?" Whitmore sneered. "And I suppose your fancy White House connections had nothing to do with that." He pointed a shaking finger at Cross. "You think you can waltz into my courtroom with your political privilege and—" "Objection, Your Honor," Lansing interrupted, his voice stronger now. "This is completely inappropriate." "Silence," Whitmore roared, slamming his gavel so hard the sound echoed off the marble walls. "I will not be lectured on appropriateness by some conservative puppet." Cross remained unflinching. "Perhaps we should discuss the specific contents of the March 15th meeting." Whitmore froze. His hand, midair with the gavel, stopped shaking. For the first time all morning, a flicker of fear crossed his features. "Those meetings are not relevant to these proceedings," he said quickly, though his voice faltered. "Not relevant?" Cross asked softly. "That's interesting, Your Honor, considering they involve direct discussions about charitable contributions." "Enough." Whitmore slammed both hands on his bench. "One more word about those meetings, and I'll have you removed." The gallery was deathly quiet as Whitmore's composure continued to crumble. His hands shook as he grabbed random papers, his breathing ragged. "In fact," he growled, his voice taking on a wild edge, "I'm holding you in contempt right now. You think your position protects you? You're nothing but a Trump lackey in an expensive suit." "My position has nothing to do with this," Cross replied, his tone steady. "But since you mentioned protection, perhaps we should discuss the Liberty Coalition's protection payments." Whitmore went ghostly pale. "How dare you? I mean, what payments?" "There were no guards. Remove this man from my courtroom." The court officers hesitated. Something was wrong, and they all felt it. Cross calmly opened his briefcase. "Perhaps you'd like to explain these bank transfers, Your Honor? Offshore accounts, deposits coinciding with rulings against conservative defendants." "Shut up," Whitmore screamed, standing abruptly. "You have no right, no authority. I'm a law here." Cross raised a document. "Your signature on these authorization forms suggests otherwise." Whitmore lunged toward the bench, pointing wildly. "You planted those. This is a setup. A conspiracy." "A conspiracy," Cross echoed softly. Interesting choice of words. The room was silent except for Whitmore's ragged breathing. "You think you can come in here with your smug face and your evidence?" Whitmore barked. "Evidence that shows a disturbing pattern," Cross finished for him. "Like the Thompson case last month. A small business owner ruined because you refused to allow evidence of his charitable work." Whitmore's laugh was hollow. "That fraud deserved what he got." "Or the Wilson hearing," Cross continued. "Records sealed hours after you met with Liberty Coalition officials." Whitmore's face twitched violently. "How do you know about no more, or Mrs. Anderson's case?" Cross said, holding another document. "Her life savings lost. Conveniently, the company that sued her donated to your campaign weeks before." "Shut up," Whitmore screamed. His gavel flew from his hand, narrowly missing his clerk. "Officers," he bellowed. "Arrest him. Seize those documents. Now." No one moved. "Why are you so eager to seize these documents?" Cross asked calmly. "I don't have to explain myself," Whitmore shouted, pacing like a caged animal. "I'm a federal judge. My authority is absolute." "Absolute authority seems to be a recurring theme with you," Cross replied. Whitmore froze. "How did you? Those records were supposed to be destroyed," Cross said. "Like the Liberty Coalition meeting notes?" "Enough," Whitmore roared. You think you can expose? Expose what? Cross-pressed. Systematic abuse of power? Targeting of conservative defendants? Bribes? Silence. Whitmore screamed, hurling a law book across the room. You want to talk about abuse of power? Cross said softly. What about Sarah Mitchell's case? Dismissed after your private meeting with CEO James Patterson. Whitmore's face drained of color. The same Patterson who deposited $500,000 into your Cayman account, Cross added. You have no right. Whitmore shrieked. Private recordings from your chambers tell a different story, Cross replied, instructing your clerk to lose evidence. Emily broke into tears. He made me do it, she sobbed. He said he'd ruin me. You can't prove any of this. Whitmore cried desperately. We have your voice, Cross said. Your signature. Your fingerprints. Whitmore lunged again. Give me those files. Order denied, a new voice said. A team of FBI agents entered the courtroom. Their lead agent held up his badge. This court is now under federal investigation, he declared. Judge Gerald Whitmore, stay where you are. You can't do this. Whitmore shrieked. I have immunity. We know exactly who you are, the agent replied, and what you've done. Whitmore's eyes darted around in panic. They made me do it. If I talk, then talk, the agent said. Tell us about the Liberty Coalition. Whitmore's defiance wavered. I want my lawyer. Cross stepped forward. And while you're at it, perhaps explain the payments to the 7 other judges ruling in coordination with you. Gasps filled the gallery. This wasn't just about you, Cross continued. This was a network. As Whitmore was handcuffed, he turned one last time to Cross. You think this changes anything? There will always be others like me. You're right, Cross replied quietly. But there will always be people willing to stand against them. The aftermath was swift. Investigation spread. The network crumbled. Justice was served. Mr. Bennett's charges were dismissed. At the end of the day, justice isn't about power or politics. It's about truth. And if you stand for truth and accountability, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more inspiring stories. God bless you, and God bless America.